What if the Spanish Armada won? The year is 1588. The month is August, and King Philip of Spain is determined to overthrow the Protestant Queen of England, Elizabeth I. Well, there were some good reasons for invading the nation. Elizabeth had provided a bunch of materials and aid to the Low Countries, which were a bunch of Spanish provinces that had revolted against the king. Also, there was a matter of religion. Philip of Spain was Catholic and had the full support of Pope Sixtus in his war against Elizabeth. Sixtus noted that the battle was like a crusade, so Philip prepared his ships to go off and invade England. Seems simple enough, right? However, he somehow managed to be set back by a bunch of failures. Things were not going well when in 1587 the English privateer Francis Drake destroyed a bunch of ships harbored in the Spanish port of Cadiz. This set back plans for the invasion of England by a year. The incident was called "singeing the beard of the King of Spain." After that incident, the Marquis of Santa Cruz, a highly experienced officer, was put in charge of the Armada, but soon he died, and some inexperienced officer was put in charge. Yet another failure. Although the English outnumbered the Spanish in number of ships, the Spanish also had more firepower. Oh, and yeah, they had a huge army waiting to be transported for the attack. However, the English, used a variety of innovative techniques, such as smaller, nimbler ships and fire ships to defeat the Spanish. However, this cannot be argued to be the main reason for the defeat of the Spanish. I would argue that the main reason was the bad weather. The bad weather even scattered a bunch of ships that the Spanish sent again 2 times in later years. Philip II of Spain would say, upon hearing of the failure of his men, that he had sent the Armada against men, not gods, winds, and waves. So thus the Spanish were defeated. Mother Nature was not in the favor of the Spanish that day. The bad weather pushed the Spanish out to the North Sea. It was unable to meet up with a very large army in the Flemish provinces of Spain. Many ships were dashed against the coast of Ireland. This meant that thousands of men died, or were slaughtered by the English waiting on the island. The weather was unusually rough, so if we remove that key factor, we can say that it is very probable that the Spanish would win, just due to sheer naval power. The Spanish had thousands of men and many ships on their side, and I think that even with a determined English resistance, the Spanish would win. If that were to happen, history would be changed forever. However, we must note that contrary to popular belief, the Spanish Armada's defeat at the hands of the English didn't radically transfer naval power to the English. The Spanish were still the most powerful naval power before and after sending the Armada, and many people think wrongly that immediately after their loss, they were this weak power, while England took their place as the naval overlords. This is false. Spain only began to decline by the mid 1600s as a naval power, although it had begun a long decline before that. Anyway, that is beside the point. If the Spanish were able to make it to England, they could almost certainly beat back the English army, permitting the weather was good, of course. The Spanish army would outnumber the English and likely make it to London. If they overthrow Elizabeth I, then what would follow? Well, the Spanish would likely install a Catholic leader over the nation and attempt to wipe the country of its Protestant traces. However, I must note that this would likely end in a failure. Let's look at the Spanish Netherlands to see what would happen if a Catholic Spain tried to impose its rule on a Protestant nation. Uprisings and revolts would likely be the main response. The Spanish would likely find it difficult to hold on to its lands in England, and would engage in a very long and drawn out conflict with guerrilla fighters and resistance movements. This would be similar to the 80 Years' War in the Spanish Netherlands. I predict that after decades of fighting, Spain would be exhausted and depleted of resources. Anyway, by that time, Spain would be deep in decline, having declared bankruptcies and such. I think that eventually, after about a century of Spanish rule, the Catholic monarch would move out. Eventually, the lands would be returned to an English monarch. Would there be any lasting effects? Well, I don't know. But what I can say is that the English power would actually be decreased. This is because it was during the 1600s that the English had begun expanding their sea power and establishing colonies in the New World. And being a latecomer to the colony business in this alternate timeline, they would be a lesser power than the rest. By the late 1600s, when England had freed itself from Spanish rule, other European powers such as the Dutch and Swedes will have already entrenched themselves deeply in the North American continent. So the Dutch will control what is now New York City, since the English will still be recovering from the fighting with the Spanish. I think I can confidently say that the demise of Spain and its empire will be hastened in this timeline, as it has gained another power to fight and sap its resources. In England, morale would be much lower than in our timeline, and defeating the Catholic Armada led the Protestants to believe that God was on their side and raised their morale. But with the Armada the winner in this case, some will even begin to doubt faith in Protestantism. So, what would the world look like today? Well, I expect Protestants and the power of Britain to be much less powerful in this timeline. Being late to the colonialism game, Britain is a smaller power with less of an empire. Today, Spanish is a more widespread language than it is in our timeline, a remnant of the Spanish occupation of England. Well, there you have it, folks. Like and subscribe for more great content. This is Scholar of the World, signing out.
Ich sah mein Lieb, wie sehr du elend bist. Ich scrolle nicht, ich scrolle nicht.